Okay, here's part 2 of our question where we're going to look at part G and part H. So the coefficient of determination is r squared, and I've got the formula for it here. The coefficient of correlation is r. In some cases, r is simply the square root of r squared. That's when r is a positive. So if there's a positive correlation, if one thing goes up and causes the other thing to go up, or vice versa, if one thing goes down and causes the other to go down, then that's a positive correlation. A negative correlation is when one thing goes up and causes another thing to go down. So the danger in taking the square root of r squared to find r is that you also have to think about whether it should be a positive or a negative correlation. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get there. So I've added one more calculation because the y squared calculation, the sum of the y squareds, has to be included in this formula, even though it's not in the A and the B for the regression line formula. So if you're just careful about how you fill things in here, r squared equals, and it's going to be much the same as when we found a and b. We're going to put in 8 for n, your sum of your x, y's multiplied together, sum of x, and then we're going to square that. Sorry, I made a mistake there. I knew that as soon as I wrote it. Sum of x, I'm looking at the bottom line by mistake. So we're here. So sum of x times the sum of y. And then we're going to take that answer and we're going to square the whole thing. And on the bottom, we're going to have 8 times the sum of the x squareds, which we have here, 793, minus the sum of x squared. So we're going to take the 71 and square it. In the second bracket, we're going to take 8 times the sum of the y's squareds, which is 40198. And we're going to subtract that with the sum of the y's all squared. And so that means we're going to take that 556 number and square it. That's the sum of the y's. Put a square bracket around that. Okay, I missed my square bracket here, or I erased it or something. All right, so when you work all that out, we'll end up with the value for the r squared. Now, in this case, because we're dealing with a relationship that we can see from our graph, that the number of classes missed, as that goes up, the mark comes down. So what we have is sort of an inverse relationship here, or what we would call a negative correlation. So if you realize that, you can save yourself a lot of work by just taking the square root of r squared in order to find r, and then making it negative. So when it comes time to find r, the coefficient of correlation, you can take the square root of r squared, and because we know from looking at our line of best fit and our scatter plot that this is a negative correlation, because when one thing goes up, the other comes down, then we know it's going to be negative, so we know to stick that negative sign there. Otherwise, you would use the formula for r, which takes care of that, because it's really the square root on top of what you did before, because it was squared here, and you're not going to square it this time. And on the bottom, it's the square root of the denominator of this guy. And so that takes care of the negative for you, and if you use that formula to find r for your coefficient of correlation each time, you'll always get your signs right. Otherwise, you have to do a little bit of intuitive thinking and decide on your own whether it's negative or positive, and then just simply take the square root of whatever you got for r squared over here. So I think that answers all of the questions for number 6 and goes through it. I know the formulas look scary, but I really think that if you do the organization part at the beginning first, that you're going to be much better off just popping numbers into the equation, and it's going to make a lot more sense I would advise that you do the calculations more than once, just to make sure that you didn't put something wrong in your calculator and that both the answers agree, and that way you won't lose, marks for some kind of mechanical or computation error when you've gone through all the work and you know what you're doing and it's just you missed a negative somewhere or something like that. So I hope that helps. If not, please send me another email and we'll work out whatever the problems are. Thanks.